So my name is Nabeelah, and I want to start off today with a bit of audience participation. So can I get a show of hands if you have ever written a Confluence plugin? Okay, so about a third of you. That's pretty good. Second question, are you comfortable with JavaScript? Most people in the room. And the third and final question, do you enjoy memes? What? Less people enjoy memes than have written a Confluence plugin? There's something wrong with this room. So the reason I asked you the first question is because today I'm going to be talking about Confluence a little bit, but I kind of lied with the title. Ryan just gave an excellent talk on Confluence and writing plugins for it, so this talk is going to be all about Speakeasy. I asked you the second question about JavaScript because I'm going to be showing you a couple of code snippets throughout this talk, and they'll all be in JavaScript, so it helps to have a basic understanding of the syntax, but you guys seem like you'll be fine. And I asked you the question about memes to gauge your general taste level. So now that I know a bit about you, let me introduce myself. My name is Nabeelah Ali. I am a Confluence developer at Atlassian's Sydney office. For Confluence 4, I worked on front-end features like the editor, the image property panel, and the link browser. So as you heard from Charles and Sharif yesterday, we've just released Confluence 4, and it has a whole bunch of new features we think you'll enjoy. The thing about Confluence, which makes it different from almost any other Atlassian product, is that it has the most diverse user base. We make tools for developers, but with Confluence, which we dog food internally quite extensively, at Atlassian, everybody uses it, from the product managers to the developers to the admin staff. So there's a whole range of technical levels. There's also a whole range of use cases. And with a product like that, where you've got lots of different use cases, it's really hard to tailor the product so that it suits everybody. And that's where one of our Atlassian values comes into play. It's be the change you seek. So often at Atlassian, when a developer thinks there should be a feature that's missing in a product, they go ahead and write it. It's what we have 20% time for, and other cool things like that. So this applied to one of our developers who decided that he liked rage faces, and he really wanted to use them in his Confluence pages. And yeah, you could just go and insert an image each time, but that's kind of boring, you know? Why spend 10 seconds doing something when you could spend a couple of hours automating it? So he wrote a plugin that would look for anything that was formatted like this. So square braces / something that looks like a rage face descriptor. It would do regular expression search and replace on the page. Look for anything like that, replace it with the appropriate rage face image. So you might be thinking, this is cool. It's a bit of JavaScript, a bit of CSS, a couple of images, and now my life is easier. But how would you go about doing that? So you could create a regular Confluence plugin, right? You could include the JavaScript and CSS that you wanted as resources. So over here, I've just listed some web resources. The contrast is a bit off. I've also specified a context. So in this case, I've specified the context atl.general. What this will do is, for every screen that's not an admin screen, it will automatically load these resources in. So that's quite handy. It means I can just write my JavaScript. It will automatically load in those contexts. But the problem with this is, say I wasn't a Confluence developer. I was just somebody who wanted to really write a Rage Faces plugin. To actually get started with development, say I didn't know anything about writing plugins, I'd need to go and I'd probably go download the plugin SDK, right? So I'd download the plugin SDK, I'd figure out how to use it, configure it, then I'd maybe do an Atlas create Confluence plugin so I could see what a plugin XML looks like. After that, I'd modify it, include my JavaScript and CSS, and then I'd run and I'd debug and run again. And then once I'd done with that, I would package it all up into a nice jar. And then, assuming I was a Confluence administrator, I'd be able to go and install my plugin. But there's a couple of problems with this. One is that it's kind of a lot of hurdles to do something really simple. I just wanted to run like a tiny bit of JavaScript to make my Confluence life more fun, but I had to go through all these steps just to get there. So the time between having that idea and actually being able to demo that idea is quite long. Another thing is that if I just want to use this extension personally, so I want to use this Rage Faces plugin, but probably not everybody else in the company does. There's no easy way to do that with plugins, right? As soon as you install a plugin, it's enabled for everybody on your system, so all the users of your Confluence instance. So there is a better way, and that better way is Speakeasy. So you've heard a little bit about Speakeasy from Mike and also Don today. I'll be talking about it in more detail. After I explain more about Speakeasy, we'll then be building an extension together in Confluence, and then I'll be dispensing some cautionary advice before pointing you to some resources. And I want to point out at this point that although I'm using Confluence as an example, Speakeasy is a cross-product plugin that you can install on Bamboo, that you can install on Jira. So I'm going to be using Confluence and only talking about Confluence, but just keep in mind that whatever system or Confluence product or rather Atlassian product you develop for, you can probably use Speakeasy on it. So Speakeasy is the brainchild of Don Brown. It's a cross-product plugin which allows you to run client-side JavaScript and CSS. I'm going to give you a little demo of what it looks like for an end user now. So when you install the Speakeasy plugin on your instance, it looks like this. Underneath the username dropdown in Confluence, you now have an extensions option there. When you click on it, you get to a page that looks like this. So this page is listing all the extensions that are available on my instance of Confluence. And as you can see at Atlassian, we really make use of the Speakeasy mechanism. So there are a whole heap of extensions here that I could enable. The thing about this is social, right? So these aren't extensions that I wrote. These are extensions that other people have written. And they don't necessarily have to be Confluence administrators. They can be any user of this instance. So with each extension, I can do a couple of things. I can see how many users there are, so I can gauge how popular each extension is. I can also go and the source of an extension if I'm interested in how something works. Speakeasy ships with this really cool lightweight IDE, which allows you to view and edit code really simply within the browser. I can also even send feedback to the author of this extension, telling them the extension is cool or that it broke my instance of Confluence or whatever. You can also download the extension, so that just downloads a zip containing all the files within the extension, or you can fork the extension, which will allow you to make modifications if you think that plugin is cool, but it needs a bit of extra pizzazz or what have you. So I want to point out the fact that this is per user. So if I click the disable or enable button on these extensions, it's happening just for me. So I can look at these extensions and I can pick and choose what suits my needs or what new features I want to try out. And I can enable them or disable them at will. So now that you've seen what it looks like, I want to show you how to create your first extension. Speakeasy ships with a really easy mechanism for creating your first extension skeleton. And this is how you do it. So from the top right, you can click the install button. Once you do that, you have two options. You can upload from your computer a zip file containing all the files that need to be in your extension, or you can use the wizard. The wizard will create the skeleton for you, and it's by far the easiest method. You just need a plugin key, or an extension key rather, and then you need to give it a name and a description. And it's important to give it a useful description so that your extension users can actually see on that page what your extension does. So I'm creating an extension here. I'm just going to click the submit button. And that will create the extension. It's as simple as that. And now it's available straight away for me to use. So I'm going to go ahead and enable it. And this wizard will create a skeleton that actually does something. So I'm going to go to a Confluence page now, and I'm going to refresh it to see my plugin in action. So the skeleton plugin just adds a little bit of an image and some text to your page. Now let's go and edit that. So I'm going to use that lightweight IDE again. So here's a lightweight IDE, and now I can actually save and edit it because I'm the creator of this extension. So I'm going to go into the JavaScript file in just a second. This is the file structure on the left, which is kind of hard to see, but the most important file here is the Atlassian extension.json file, which contains a JSON blob which describes your extension. It has the key, it has the name, the version, and so on. So here is the JavaScript file. As you can see, the first two things that it's doing, you might not be able to see it, but it's just pulling in jQuery. And then I'm just pulling in a reference to an image that's in my images directory. And so this second line is what actually creates that little image and the little text where it said hi. I'm going to modify that so it says hi, Mom. So I'm just going to type straight into that editor, click the Save button. And at the bottom, it won't be readable from your distance, but it shows you that the plugin is saving and then reloading. And now it's saved and reloaded, so I'm going to go back to that page, and I'm going to refresh it once again. So as you can see, my changes have taken effect. So this is kind of approaching that holy grail even further, because I don't even need to tab out, Alt-tab to anywhere. I can edit my extension in the browser, and I can test it in the browser. And if I wanted to, I could do this all on a production instance of Confluence, because if I have it enabled only for myself, then any breakages only I will see. So for plugin developers, this is awesome because it's fast, right? You can create plugins in about, you can create extensions rather in about 10 seconds. You can edit them in the browser. You can test them out straight away, and you can do this on a production instance. If you're a Confluence admin, it's cool because you can do awesome shit with like your production data. There's a lot of opportunity there to try out things that you ordinarily wouldn't have been able to. It also encourages user-driven development. So as you can see from that extensions page, I can see how many users have enabled or disabled a specific extension, so I can see which are more popular, what users are actually looking for. And the third thing is that it democratizes development. An interesting thing about the people who develop Speakeasy extensions within Atlassian is that very often they're not developers. They're product managers, or they're marketing people. There's a whole range of people that develop extensions, and they aren't necessarily super technical. And that's because the barrier for entry here is so low. You don't need to have a really heavy IDE set up. You don't need to check out a whole bunch of source code or download the plugin SDK. You can do it all from within the browser. A couple of notes on setup if you're wondering how to get this in your instance. First things, we need a Confluence instance. If you want to try this out in your production just yet, you can use a plugin SDK to run a standalone version of Confluence. So you just do an Atlas run standalone, specify the product and the version. And once you've done that, this is Confluence. Ooh. Once you've done that, you just need to log in as a Confluence administrator, go to your admin pages, go to your plugin screen, and install it as a regular plugin. The jar location it's in our Maven repository, and it's included at the end of my talk, but you can also find the location of that on developer.atlassian.com. So it's as simple as installing a plugin, and once you have that, your users can then see the extensions option from the drop-down. So I want to show you now a couple of extensions that people have written inside Atlassian. Mike showed you some. Don also showed you a couple. So one of them is the like extension. This is written by a product manager. It basically adds a comment every time you click the like button to say that this person has liked this page or this blog post. Another extension is one written by a developer. So in a code macro, it'd be useful if you could copy the code in a code macro, wouldn't it? But you couldn't do that. So he decided to write a Speakeasy plugin that used the Zero Clipboard library to allow a one-click copy of anything in a code macro. And one of our front-enders decided to go a little crazy and see exactly how much styling and skinning he could do from within Speakeasy for Confluence. So he wrote Confluence. So this is fun because since we have Speakeasy enabled on the instance of Confluence I use on a day-to-day basis, I can enable this extension and have neon black and blue extranet every day. So those are a couple of examples. Let's now build an extension from start to finish to show you what the process is like. So the extension I'm going to build is this. I've decided that people often mention Twitter hashtags on Confluence pages and blog posts. And it's kind of annoying if I want to see recent activity for that hashtag, because I need to go to Twitter, and then I need to do a search for that hashtag, and it takes a whole 10 seconds. So instead of having to do that, we're going to write a little extension, which I've decided to call the Tweetinator, because it sounds fun. That will link your hashtags. So it'll look on a page for anything that looks like a hashtag. It will make it a link. It will include a little bird icon, and when you hover over it, it will show you the 5 most recent tweets for that hashtag. So as you can see, a dialog that pops up totally fits in with the Confluence themes. It doesn't look out of place, and it even inverts if my dialog is at the bottom of a page. So let's write it. There's a couple of things that we need to do, clearly. We need to include the image somewhere in our Speakeasy extension so we have access to it. We need to then restrict the context. So Speakeasy will run by default, so it'll load your extension resources in every page that isn't an administration page. I only want my extension to run on pages that are, when I'm viewing pages or when I'm viewing blog posts, and not on other screens of Confluence. So we're going to do that. And I'm going to do the find and replace of the content on the page so that I get that little link text and that little bird icon. Then I'm going to do a request to the Twitter search API just to pull in those 5 most recent tweets. And finally, we'll stick it all in a nice little dialog and make it look pretty. So the first thing we need to do, I'm going to take that little Twitter icon and stick it in the images directory of my Speakeasy extension. I'm then going to use that line so I get a reference to where it lives. So what I'm then going to do is restrict the context. So in Confluence, we namespace almost everything under AJS. So I'm going to do this all when the DOM is actually ready for me to manipulate. So I'm just going to put that, I'm going to encase all my code in a .ready. And so I'm going to use the fact that I can get the meta information from a Confluence page using AJS.meta. So if you haven't explored stuff under AJS.meta, it depends on what page you're on, but you can get the page ID or the context path for instance of Confluence or whatever. So I'm going to use AJS.meta here, firstly, to check that we're on a page or a blog post, and secondly, just to check that we're not in edit mode for that page or blog post. What I'm then going to do is grab the content from the page so I can do that search and replace. I'm going to do it fairly lo-fi. Pages in Confluence, pretty basic, header footer content. So I'm going to grab all the stuff in the main content div. And then I'm just going to do a JavaScript replace. So this regular expression here just looks for things that look like a Twitter hashtag. And then I'm just going to encase the Twitter hashtag in a link and also include that little image. So low-tech, what we now have is our page. Our hashtags are being picked up. They're being linked. I have little bird, but I still don't have that whole dialogue thing and the whole connecting to Twitter thing. So let's do that now. So for the dialogue, I hope you're thinking we should totally use that Atlassian user interface thing that people keep talking about. Ben's talk yesterday was great. Gave you a good overview of OWI, so now we're going to use OWI. There's a whole lot of components, and we're going to use the inline dialog. So using the inline dialog is pretty simple. We're actually doing the more complicated version of how to use the inline dialog here, just because I want to specify the content and tell it when to show the pop-up. So I just need these 2 lines of code here, and I'm going to set onHover to be true, because ordinarily an inline dialog will trigger when the element that you bind it to is clicked on as opposed to when it's hovered over. Once I've done that, I need to do my Twitter request. So I'm going to be using jQuery's getJSON method here. And I guess the only trick here is that we're doing a cross-domain request, right? So we're doing a request from wherever our Confluence instance lives to Twitter. And so I'm going to force a JSONP request by just including the callback equals question mark at the end of that. And so the parameters I'm passing in here, I'm asking for 5 results, tweets in English, and stuff with my hashtag as the search parameter. Okay, so now we've got a dialogue. We are pulling in information from Twitter. I'm going to skip the boring bit where we take the information that I have in the callback, so that data, and like style it just to fit in that div, because it's kind of straightforward. So this is what the dialogue looks like with just the request put in. So the yellow bits are bits that AUI actually needs. So as you can see, the code I needed to make that dialogue work is actually really minimal. And this is the entire script that we just wrote. You can't read it, that's okay. I just want to show you how short it is. It's only a couple of lines of JavaScript. And yet, we have kind of cool functionality. Our dialogue fits in with the rest of Confluence. It does something that's kind of useful. We get lots of stuff for free, especially when we're using reusable components like that AUI inline dialogue. The fact that it inverts when we're at the end of the page for free. I can't stress how important that is enough. Okay, and now let's move on to some cautionary advice. I hope, actually, I might take a poll at this stage. How many of you think that you might use Speakeasy or even try it out to see what it's like? Excellent. Okay, so before I let you run loose, I'm going to dispense a bit of cautionary advice. So the first bit is, if you're doing this thing where you develop in the browser, or not even in the browser, but you develop and you keep testing in your production instance, your stuff can go wrong. Like you might set display none to the main container, and suddenly you can't even access the extensions page anymore because you don't know where it is, and you can't click on anything, and you're freaking out. It's okay, because there's an unsubscribe URL. If you visit this URL, it will disable all your extensions temporarily, so you're back to pure Confluence with no Speakeasy extensions. Once you've figured out what the problem is, so you had a crazy extension, you've disabled it or uninstalled it or changed it so it actually works, you can just visit the restore URL, and that will re-enable everything that was just disabled. So the second question, and this will be relevant if you're a Confluence administrator, is should you use it? So there's a couple of things to consider here. And the first is, do you trust your users? You're allowing your users to run JavaScript as you. So if you don't trust your users, then it might not be such a good idea to install Speakeasy on your production instance. The second thing is, does your instance allow public sign-up? We all learned from our mothers, hopefully, you shouldn't trust strangers. So if your instance allows public sign-up, probably don't want to turn on Speakeasy. However, there are mechanisms by which you can restrict who can author and who can enable extensions on your system. So Speakeasy has a settings page here, so I can actually limit the people that are able to author extensions to specific user groups. So that really helps. And I can do a couple of other things. So maybe if you have a really important Confluence instance and you want to make sure that your administrators aren't exposed to any security vulnerabilities that might be contained within Speakeasy extensions, you could make sure that they're not able to enable Speakeasy extensions. So I want to talk a bit about good coding practices. So even if you're writing a Speakeasy plugin, a Speakeasy extension rather, and it might be used by a couple of people, it's still important to keep good coding practices in mind, and that includes writing code that doesn't have security vulnerabilities. So I'm going to digress for just a second to talk about cross-site scripting. This occurs when you insert unescaped HTML into a page. This is bad. This can happen really often, and I know a lot of people writing Speakeasy extensions have come across this just because they're fetching data, like a REST resource or whatever, and it has unescaped HTML, or they're accepting some user input. So here's an example. Say you had this. You could do this if you wanted to set the content of that div. This is bad, don't do this. You could instead do this. Ben mentioned the escape HTML function. Right? Or you can use jQuery, make sure it inserts it into a text node. So just remember to keep security in mind even when you're writing Speakeasy extensions. If you want to know more about this kind of stuff, Penny Wyatt which is one of our security experts at Atlassian, gave a great talk at last year's AtlasCamp. So if you want to watch that or just like relive the nostalgia or whatever, it's available on the AtlasCamp 2010 website. You can go look at videos, slides, and all the other talks are there as well. So there's a plug for that. So where can you go from here? You can go a lot of places. So Speakeasy has Git support. This is actually really cool. This means that you can clone an extension from your instance of Confluence, and then you can make changes to it. You can push the changes back up. It makes editing an extension really seamless and really easy, and I encourage you to try it out. It's actually quite simple to do this. So if you go to the drop-down menu next to an extension and you click Git commands, it will tell you exactly what to do. So it tells you what to do to clone it and how to pull it. If this were my extension, it would also give me an option to push it back. The second thing is that there's a whole lot of stuff I haven't talked about Speakeasy, which is awesome. So there's an app links proxy, there's an XML RPC client, so you can do lots more things with Speakeasy that I haven't talked about. This is all really well documented, so you can check the docs once again at developer.atlassian.com. And remember that Speakeasy is not just for Confluence, so if you're a developer for Jira, for Bamboo, for whatever else, you can try out Speakeasy, you can prototype new features, you can customize your instances to suit you for your day-to-day running of those products. A couple of resources. So the Speakeasy documentation is there. You can also look at the source for Speakeasy. So that's on GitHub. And the last link is the Maven repository where the Speakeasy jars are located. So I encourage you all to try out Speakeasy. Low risk, fun, enjoyable even, the holy grail of prototyping perhaps. So go ahead and try that out, and thank you.